reboot the economy with degrowth. That's what fascism really is. Look, capitalism is the only system in history where abundance creates poverty. People become homeless because there are too many houses. People become hungry because there is too much food. Abundance creates poverty. In a rational society, if we had self-driving cars, that would be a great thing because the chore called driving would no longer be necessary. But in our highly irrational system, self-driving cars would mean all the Uber drivers out of work, all the truck drivers out of work, all the traffic courts and state highway patrolmen out of work. It would be an economic disaster. That's not rational. Right. And when you have a system where profits are in command and production and the whole economy centers around maximizing profits for a private group of owners, you get a situation where the more efficient technology becomes and the easier it is to produce products, the poorer society gets and the more unstable the economy is. That's not rational. And that's the problem that we have. And, you know, during the Great Depression, they had a prolonged crisis of overproduction, which is what we've got right now. They had a prolonged crisis. And the method of trying to stabilize the economy in Nazi Germany was they created a slave labor underclass of concentration camp inmates. They restarted military spending and they were able to eradicate unemployment and reboot, you know, the German economy for 2 or 3 years. But then after 2 or 3 years, they were right back where they started and they launched World War II as a way of trying to keep things going. And that fascism is degrowth. It is an attempt to stabilize the capitalist economy by engaging in destruction. And when we hear the ultra rich at the World Business Forum talking about, you know, they have these dark, high-tech dystopian visions of, you know, you'll own nothing, you'll live in a pod, you'll eat bugs and you'll be happy about it. That's Malthusianism. That's what they've always wanted from the time of Margaret Sanger and the Rockefeller family right up to today. The understanding is for them to stay at the top of the world world has got to stop growing and they've got to drive down the population. And so they've got to stay at the top and they can't let humanity keep growing, even though that's the nature of humanity. We are a growth-oriented species that builds and expands, etc. They've got to stay at the top. So humanity has just got to be, you know, shoved downward and destroyed in order to keep them at the top indefinitely. And that's Malthusianism, and that's the vision that the ultra-rich have. And they frame it in terms of environmentalism, but I don't think it's really concerned about environment. Look, if you want to get beyond fossil fuels, what about fusion energy, right? China is doing great research on getting us beyond fossil fuels to something even higher. And I think, yeah, fossil fuels are a problem. I don't deny global warming, but the answer is to get to a higher energy source, to a higher level of energy flux density. That's what we need. And you know, that's the reality, but they don't want that. The answer is, well, because of climate change, we've all just got to be poorer and we've got to wage wars around the world against Iran or Venezuela or Cuba or Russia or China or any country that's broken out of our dominion. They're trying to save a naturally unstable system. This is globalism, imperialism, monopolistic capitalism in its death throes, dealing with the reality of when you have a system where profits are in command, it can't handle technological innovations, and humanity is a creative species. We've gotten beyond the artificial restraints and restrictions of this highly irrational system.
And that's exactly why we're so far behind China. That's the part that I think people really don't understand. You look around right now, especially in light of the response that is being exhibited by everyone from all corners of the earth, particularly a lot of the citizenry here, when it comes to the genocide in Gaza, the continued attempted genocide in southern Lebanon, and now we're seeing what Iran is doing. And yet, at the same time, as I'm sure you know, many of you in the audience probably know as well, JNS held their conference in Jerusalem over the weekend, and this is the nonsense that Zio scum like Ayman Cohen had to say regarding what's the future of Israel hold right now. You might be surprised.
One threat from America is the Muslim Brotherhood. CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood are trying to take over now Florida and Texas. And first they take Florida, then they take Texas, and then America falls. New York, they already took over. Now, it's not only a threat for America, it's a threat for Israel. In 15 years from now, Israel will have a war with Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood will eventually take over Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood, which is a Sunni jihad, now after we weaken the Shia jihad, will be a threat to the world. Turkey is now taking over. Fidam Khan, what's his name? The foreign minister, Hakam Fidan, the foreign minister of Turkey, announced that we took Haleb, we took Damascus, and Jerusalem is next. The Sunni jihad is the next enemy. Israel needs to be strong. America needs to be strong. Unfortunately.
Oh, cannot. That's so funny to me. I've met the Care Florida people. I've met them. They're not trying to take over. That's the thing. I want to know who he's talking about. Also, the Muslim Brotherhood has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about. I don't know what he's talking about.
Well, I mean, they just like to make things up. But this level of disconnect, and this is also one of the things that we've talked about at great length regarding the class war. When you're talking about the average Zionist, especially when they're Jewish, they are coming from the highest rungs of society. Their disconnect to working people is not only profound in number, but their supremacist ideology truly makes them look at everybody else like, well, you're totally expendable as far as we're concerned. So even though it looks like we're in not good shape, we're still going to push forward with this nonsense. Your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. He's talking about the Muslim Brotherhood, and it is interesting. This does seem to be a difference between Democrats and Republicans. The Muslim Brotherhood was started in Egypt in the 1920s. In the 1950s, it became a vehicle for the United States to work against the president of Egypt, Abdel Nasser, who was like an Arab socialist. And the USA backed the Muslim Brotherhood to kind of work against the Arab socialist leader, Abdel Nasser. And the Muslim Brotherhood, I mean, it exists throughout the Middle East. It's kind of, they call them westernized Muslims, right? Their teaching is that that America is more Muslim than the Muslim world. The Muslim world needs to adopt the free market capitalist system, and that capitalism is fine as long as you are a good Muslim and donate to charity, etc. That's the Muslim Brotherhood current, and they have been friends of the liberal CIA. They were key in bringing down the Assad government in Syria. They were key in bringing down Gaddafi. However, Hamas started out as the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood tends to be on the side of the United States in pretty much every country in the world, except when it comes to Israel, Palestine. They are very anti-Israel because they're Muslims. And so meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. Saudi Arabia are Wahhabis. They're Sunni Muslims, but they're like the opposite interpretation. They, instead of wanting to modernize and be like the West, they're saying you want to go back to the 1400s. We want to go back to like a strict autocratic medieval kind of system. And it tends to be, I've noticed, Republicans, the Bush administration, Ronald Reagan, even up to Trump, they like Saudi Arabia. They want to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. They like Saudi oil. Whereas it tends to be the liberals, the Obamas, the Clintons that like the Muslim Brotherhood. And, and that's kind of a divide. And every so often Trump will come out and say, oh, I want to ban the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, he's kind of, they're playing games. The USA has different allies and different proxies throughout the Middle East region. And I've noticed, the main funders of the Muslim Brotherhood wing of Islam at this point are Turkey and Qatar, right? Whereas Saudi Arabia is associated with Wahhabism. Obama's strategy in the Middle East, which has completely failed. I mean, it really escalated during the Obama administration. Trump tried it in his first term. The idea was to polarize the peoples of the Middle East, the Muslims of the Middle East, between Sunni and Shia. Iran is a Shia country. The majority of the Muslims in the Middle East are Sunnis, and you have the Sunni Wahhabis around Saudi Arabia, and you have the Sunni, the westernized Sunnis that are around the Muslim Brotherhood. And the idea was to play up the idea that Iran is trying to take over the Middle East and create a Shia crescent or a Shia empire. And so they were going to unify, the Sunni Muslims to fight Iran and divide the Sunni and Shia of the Middle East. And that was kind of the strategy. And part of, the war in Syria, the way the Obama administration pushed it, and the way the Muslim Brotherhood was key and all of that, that was kind of the strategy. But October 7th and the aftermath has kind of thrown it on its head, because everyone can see now that the forces that are battling Israel and fighting against Israel are aligned with Iran. They are Shia Muslims, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it's Ansar Allah or the Houthis in Yemen, and whether it's Iran itself that is being targeted by Israel and by the United States. Every Muslim who opposes Israel can see that the real champions of the Palestinians, the true allies of the Palestinians, are aligned with Iran. So playing up the idea that Shia Muslims are no good, or false Muslims or apostates, that's just not a winning line in the Muslim world anymore. And that strategy that the Obama administration used to try and divide the Muslims on the basis of that, isolate Iran on the basis of them being Shia, that strategy has completely fallen apart. And at this point, the world is so horrified by Israel's crimes, and Iran is clearly the one fighting Israel. Iran has regained a lot of respect and a lot of credibility. I think, when we talk about the Democrats, the folks at Black Agenda Report used to say they're not the lesser of two evil, they're the more effective evil, right? They're the more, yeah. And that Obama was smart about it. Their idea was, we're not just going to say all Muslims are terrorists and Israel is great. We're gonna give a bone. We'll negotiate with Iran and we'll court the Muslim Brotherhood as allies, and we'll kind of play this long-term manipulative game that was thought up in think tanks, right? This is the Council on Foreign Relations and the Asia Society, and they've dreamed up these kind of long-term schemes for ensuring the dominance of Wall Street all over the world. But a lot of the people among the rich and powerful, they just want to make money. And that, that long-term strategy that Obama had of kind of dividing the Muslims of the world while negotiating with Iran and perhaps sinking American influence into Iran and pulling off a color revolution among the younger generation, that strategy got in the way of Netanyahu's political career. He needs an Iranian threat in order to get reelected. And it also cut into the profits of the military-industrial complex. If Iran is not a threat, how are you going to sell loads and loads of weapons all throughout the region to all the other countries? And so basically a more effective strategy for Wall Street was nullified because it cut into the short-term interests of certain entities. And that's kind of how we've seen this play out, is the Iran nuclear deal may have been a more effective mechanism, but it was overruled.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, you hit it right on the head. If it's not profitable, and that's why war is so common, that's what it comes down to. And in many ways, if you're not fighting, you're not profiting. And of course, guys like this look at it as, well, we need the plebs to go out there and die for us so we can get richer. So we'll finish it out.
Weak. Now, imagine you're an Israeli prime minister today, and you understand that in 15 years you're going to have a war with Egypt, and you don't know who's going to be the prime minister, the president of the United States in 15 years from now. What do you do today to address that challenge? Even if it's an American one, the Muslim Brotherhood takes Texas and Florida, imagine where America can be. That's a threat not only to Israel, not to Western society, it's a threat to mankind.
Well, no. The only threat to mankind is the state of Israel, because right now they are the one nation in the world that I believe that if push came to shove, and Lord knows they may be heading in that direction, that would actually drop a nuclear bomb if they needed to. So that to me has always been the Samson option. Of course, that's what it's called, would be of a great risk to all of us. And that's part of the reason why you see things like this. And then you see things like this with Colonel Kemp. This is so insane that, I mean, again, I think obviously the primary reason why people make statements like this is because they're looking for a paycheck. I understand that. But at the same time, when you talk like this, it just creates even greater fervor towards the Israel cause, which in some ways you can laugh at the statement, but then realize you're cultivating more support against Israel, which, let's face it, at this point, we need as much as we can get.
I speak as a goy, a mere goy. The Jews were put on the face of the earth to be a light unto nations. And Israel is being that light in defense of its own country. And I think most particularly, not just in military technology, but in the way in which those extraordinary men and women of the IDF have shown the world how to fight. And many countries in Western Europe, which are going to face this violence, will be looking to Israel to see how they're going to fight. So the narrative is one thing, but action, I think, is even more important.
Good boy. You did your job. If anybody's looking at the IDF for direction, women, children who are unarmed. That's it. Pretty much everybody else, they run and hide like the cowards they are. Is this some type of humiliation ritual that so many of these potential, I guess, paid propagandists have to go through in order to display their loyalty for the Zionist cause? Is that what this is about?
Well, look, he's speaking for the British elite, right? The British Empire created Zionism. Christian Zionism, invented by the British elite, predates Jewish Zionism. Before there was Theodore Herzl, there were British theologians writing about, oh, we need to send the Jews back to Palestine and set up a state because of the Bible and blah, 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 blah. And then Theodore Herzl came along and he realized that so many Jewish folks were becoming socialists and leftists, and that was a threat to the power structure, and that he feared that there would be unity between Jews and non-Jews among the working class of Europe. And so he came up with this political movement called Zionism, which was the notion that Jews can never assimilate into European society. They're just so different. They're just so special. They have to have their own state. And he pitched it to the wealthy British elite, including the Rothschilds, but not only the Rothschilds, many non-Jewish wealthy British bankers and imperialists. And he said, look, you've got Rhodesia to be your settler state in Southern Africa. You've got other settler states around the world. Why don't we Jews, will never fit in? Why don't we be the settler colony for you in the Middle East, and we'll defend your interests? And when the Balfour Declaration came down with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, et cetera, we saw the settlers in Palestine acting as agents of the British and protecting pipelines, et cetera. And then the Arab people revolted against them, and Britain sent its military in the 1930s to protect the settlers. And all of that then led to the creation of Israel in 1948. So I think that, he's pandering to that ideology when he uses those words. He says, I'm a mere goy. But he's speaking to what has been the interests of the globalist imperialist system for a long time. The Zionist ideology was fomented by the power structure, by the British Empire for their own ends, and has been that. And it wasn't until the Holocaust that it had a majority among the Jewish population. Until the Holocaust, the majority of Jewish people rejected Zionism and saw themselves as social democrats or communists or whatever. But after the Jews in Europe were killed in the Holocaust, and after British Jewish folks had kind of dominance, and after the horrendous events of the Holocaust, Zionism was able to get the upper hand, and we saw the creation of the state of Israel. And there were even a lot of leftists who were confused. Israel was pitching itself like it was going to be some socialist commune in the desert, right? I mean, the early years of it, I know a lot of leftists who said they sold trees for Israel while they sold the Daily Worker back in the 1950s, right? And it was pitching itself as a leftist cause. And it wasn't really until the 70s that Israel just kind of came to terms with the fact that it was a right-wing settler colonial project. I mean, the rise of Menachem Begin kind of confirmed that. But there was always an underlying kind of fascist current, right? The revisionist current, right? You had the mainstream Zionism of Theodore Herzl that was trying to be liberal and social democratic and sugar, spice, everything nice. But then you had the revisionist party that said, oh, what Hitler wants to do for the Germans and what Mussolini is doing for the Italians, that's what we want to do for the Jews. And, the forces that laid the basis for the Likud party, the right-wing Zionists, the revisionist party, and Oppenheimer and people like that were very open about the fact that they were a nationalist and supremacist group. They even carried out Irgun, which was their armed wing during the Second World War, carried out attacks against the British. They were hoping for a Nazi victory because they believed it would lead to all the Jews fleeing Europe and having to move to Palestine, right? And that there was a whole ugly history there. So this kind of thing is obscured. And if you just bring up any of this, people call you anti-Semitic, they call you a conspiracy theorist, but this is the reality. And that President Roosevelt, he was one of the biggest opponents of Zionism, and he was opposed to it. And in fact, I believe it was somebody named Niles who worked in the White House said that if Roosevelt had not died immediately after the Second World War, Israel would have never come into existence. That Roosevelt, he said, no, you can't create a Zionist state right there in Palestine. You just can't do that. And he died. And then it was Harry Truman who ultimately created Israel and was key in doing that. So President Roosevelt, he just said, look, I mean, that he saw that this was not going to be a successful project. And that's why the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. is dedicated to defaming Roosevelt, right? Roosevelt convinced a reluctant U.S. public to send their sons to die in the Second World War. Roosevelt was loved by American Jews as an anti-fascist, as an anti-racist, as someone who fought for the working class and created Social Security and unemployment insurance. But the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. is almost dedicated to tarnishing his memory, trying to make it look like he was somehow complicit in the Holocaust because he opposed the project of creating Israel. Roosevelt was anti-Israel. He was a friend of Jewish people. He actually, he appointed the Secretary of Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, et cetera. I mean, he was not an anti-Semite, but yet that's what is out there. And that's a big part of the Zionist narrative, is that Roosevelt was somehow this bloodthirsty anti-Semite. There's a level of anti-populism underneath all of this. And when I talk about the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline, I've written a lot about this. Trotsky very much, he did not like the Russian people. He had been a victim of anti-Semitic pogroms and persecution. And for him, the Russian Revolution was only supposed to be a mechanism of spreading communism to Europe where it really mattered. And his contempt for the peasantry and his theory of permanent revolution was largely kind of an anti-populism. And, the break between Stalin and Trotsky, and the way Trotsky writes about Stalin and calls him Asiatic, baits him over his Christian background and all of that. Trotskyism was largely kind of an anti-populism. And as we saw the Trotskyites start working with the CIA, with the Congress for Cultural Freedom program in the 1950s, and how the CIA started courting like leftist intellectuals to make anti-Soviet propaganda that would appeal to leftists, and opposing McCarthyism while also waging kind of cancel culture campaigns against Lillian Hellman and Albert Einstein and people like that for being too sympathetic to the Soviet Union. And it was Irving Kristol who ran that program, a Trotskyist, and he eventually became the father of neoconservatism. And if you read Leo Strauss and what the neocons believe, it's anti-populism. They see Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union as the same thing, that's absurd. The Soviet Union saved humanity from Hitler. They see them as the same thing, and they see them both as examples of excessive democracy, that deep down, average people are just bloodthirsty anti-Semites and bloodthirsty authoritarians. And if they get their way, they'll create some kind of totalitarian state. And what makes America great is that we protect the intellectuals and we brainwash and control the average people so they don't get in their way. And that's the philosophy of Leo Strauss. That's the philosophy of Irving Kristol. And you can kind of see a continuity of that from Trotsky all the way up into modern neoconservatism and hardline Zionism. It is contempt for the people, the belief that the people are the enemy and the people are dangerous. And I see that in some of what we hear from the Democrats and their anti-populism, the way they see Trump and the Bernie Sanders movement is the same. They're both dangerously populist. They think populism is the greatest enemy. And that seems to be the narrative that defines, American politics. That's what you learn if you go to the university. You learn that the people are the enemy, that postmodernism teaches that there is no grand narrative. There's no way of understanding human history. There is no real truth. And anyone who tries to create any real truth is a totalitarian who's trying to control you and set up an authoritarian movement. This is the kind of thinking that has become dominant in academia. And you can see how all of this is connected.